Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live today. I'm so glad to see so many of you with us from all over the world. So for those of you still joining, welcome. Thank you, no matter where you're located, no matter what the weather is like out there. Do let us know what the weather is like out there, though, and what your surroundings are looking like right now. We'd love to hear from you. So welcome to everybody. We have a great session for you today, a very, very interesting topic. We have with us author Libby Copeland, and she'll be talking with us about why genealogy and the truths it reveals are more important than ever. And before we get to that, I want to let you know about a few deals that we have going on here at MyHeritage, things that you should know about. We have the MyHeritage gift membership. This is something new that we've been offering. It's a gift membership that you can give as a gift to friends and family. It is being offered at an introductory price, 50% off. A great, great gift for family members that are starting to show interest in family history. You can give them, it's a MyHeritage Complete plan, either for 6 months or for a whole year. And that's the best plan we have to offer at MyHeritage, which includes access to 12.7 billion historical records, as well as an unlimited family tree size, unlimited access to our photo tools at MyHeritage. That's MyHeritage in color and the MyHeritage photo enhancer. So overall, really a fantastic, fantastic gift. And we hope that you're able to use it and take a look and give it as a gift to different family members. In addition, we also have a MyHeritage DNA sale. Today is Cyber Monday for those of you that have noticed it on different sites all around. And a MyHeritage Cyber Monday is being celebrated as well with a fantastic, fantastic DNA sale. So anyone who's still looking for gifts for the holidays, for friends and family. We all know how useful it is to test other family members. So we'll be putting links to all of these in the comment section. Please take a look, and we hope that you're able to take advantage of these fantastic deals in time for the holidays. I see some of you are writing about what's going on where you are. I see Lori, she says it's a mix of rain and snow here in Windsor, Ontario. So we hope that this talk will keep you warm, Lori. Carrie says it's still pretty warm where she is out in Florida. So really great to see people from all over. Thank you for joining us. So today's speaker that we have with us is a really, really exciting one. We have Libby Copeland. She's an award-winning journalist and the author of The Lost Family, How DNA Testing The Lost Family, How DNA Testing is Upending Who We Are. It was published in March, and it explores the rapidly evolving phenomenon of at-home DNA testing, its implications for how we think about family, how we think about ourselves, its ramifications for American culture. Really, really fascinating topic, and we're so, so glad to have her here with us today to talk about genealogy in general and this will to learn more about ourselves. It's just especially in these difficult times. Hello, Libby.
Hi there. I'm so thrilled to be here, Aster. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We're so happy to have you and can't wait for this talk.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. I'm talking to you from New York. It is so wet and blustery and gross that today is just a totally indoor day for me. So, I'm glad to be here with all these people from all over. I'm seeing people from places that are really warm and places that are really cold. So it's putting it in perspective.
That's really the fantastic thing about these Facebook Lives is seeing these viewers from all over the world, and it definitely brings us closer together. So it's really incredible. I also wanted to say we have a giveaway for today's show. I didn't mention it earlier. but now that you're here, I'll mention it to all of our viewers. We have a giveaway. We'll be giving away either, one lucky winner can choose either a MyHeritage Complete Plan, which I described earlier, or a MyHeritage DNA Kit. So one or the other, they can choose. And to win, all that we'd like you to do is to write in the comment section, and we want to hear how the global pandemic, how COVID, how everything has changed your outlook on genealogy. That's what we'd like you all to let us know in the comments. We want to hear, have you done more genealogy over the past few months because you've been home more? How you've related to this whole situation and how it's affected your family history research. So to enter the competition, just leave us a comment in the comment section and we'll choose one lucky winner at the end of today's session. And did you want to bring up your slides maybe and start?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Okay, so fantastic.
Fabulous. Okay.
So don't forget to comment, all of you out there, to enter in the competition. And in addition, we'll be putting up links to the sales that we talked about earlier, as well as a few links of Libby's. So pay attention to the comments. There'll be some links going up there.
Okay, I should have it up. And Esther, you can let me know when everyone else can see it too.
Okay, great. I think we see it now.
Fabulous. Okay. Well, I am so happy to be here with MyHeritage talking to all of you. And I am a journalist, and I write about technology and culture and the family. And that's sort of how my book, The Lost Family, kind of came to be out of that interest. I'm fascinated by DNA testing and genealogy, and I've spent the last few years studying how these technologies are informing and transforming us by prompting us to think about really important aspects of our personal lives having to do with identity, with family, with nature and nurture, and with the truth that the past really isn't over. It has the power to shape our modern existence, which is why I've titled my talk, Why Genealogy and the Truths It Reveals Are More Important Than Ever. So I want to start with an observation some of you may have had, followed by a question. Genealogy is having a big moment right now, but why? What cultural forces are propelling so many people from all over the world to turn to the past as a means toward better understanding the present? What's the appeal at this particular moment in time of knowing more about our ancestors and about our own ancestral backgrounds? So, to understand how we got here, we're going to be good historians. We're used to being family historians. So, we're going to go back a little ways. We're going to go back a few hundred years. As historian Francois Weil has written in his book, Family Trees, genealogy was actually seen as somewhat of a suspicious hobby in the early days of the new American Republic. It was seen as linked with the British aristocracy's concern with social rank, and early Americans, we saw ourselves as too egalitarian and forward-looking for that kind of hobby. So early Americans weren't into it. But in time, Americans warmed to family history research. And genealogy has changed a lot over the centuries. Sometimes it's responded to and exacerbated divisions among people, focusing on hierarchies in class and race, but at other times, it has celebrated roots wherever they come from. Sometimes the humbler, the better. So for instance, one 1850s genealogist from Pennsylvania even went so far as to boast of what he proudly termed his family's quote unquote mediocrity. That's what he called it. He was very proud of it. By 1879, the New York Times declared that the United States was becoming the most genealogical nation on the face of the earth. Little could the New York Times know what our collective fascination with genealogy would come to, not just in the United States, but in many countries across the world. So during the second half of the 20th century, the pursuit of family history became the means by which a broad, multicultural swath of people could understand themselves and their ancestors. Weil writes that in the US, some key factors in the cultural broadening of interest in genealogy included the civil rights movement and Alex Haley's novel and miniseries Roots. The rise of the personal computer and the internet and DNA testing have made family history research much more accessible to everyone. In fact, believe it or not, more than 35 million people have taken a DNA test through companies like MyHeritage to match them to genetic relatives and predict where in the world their genes come from. Family researchers, meanwhile, have access to literally billions of historical records online, and more are added all the time. The idea of having all those records at your fingertips is mind blowing and would have made past genealogists really, really jealous. More than at any other time in history, people all over the world have access to the past in a really immediate fashion. We can meet our distant cousins, we can learn more about a grandparent who passed away decades ago, or flesh out a tree going back to the 1600s because of the power of combining DNA findings with traditional research. Many of those of us who are searching for our roots are doing so not because we want to prove a connection to some lofty forebears, but out of curiosity and perhaps out of a sense of rootlessness. Time and assimilation may have stripped us of our connection to the past, but we have a longing to reclaim it, to understand it. So, who searches? In my reporting on genealogy and DNA testing, I've interviewed or corresponded with hundreds of people who've told me about their motivations for researching the past and how what they've found has changed them. I think of these people collectively as seekers, and I count myself among them. We are those who hope to know ourselves by knowing who and where we came from. I found that the seekers generally broke down into three categories. First, there are those with a long standing interest in family history, many of whom have been researching since long before DNA testing and maybe even the internet made it as easy as it is now. Another big category are those who set out with a question about their immediate kin. Maybe they're searching for the identity of a genetic parent, or they're trying to locate an older sibling that they've never met but have heard about. And then there are the casual consumers who may swab their cheek because they're just interested in what a DNA test might be able to tell them about their ethnic background. And then they find themselves captivated by all that the process can tell them. So, I want to pause here and tell you a short story about what happened to my family after we fell down what I like to call the rabbit hole of genealogy, which is happening to more and more people every day. Part of my dad's ancestry is from Sweden. And through DNA testing, we found a present day cousin in that country. We began emailing with her, and it turns out we lucked out because she is a genealogist. She had done a ton of research into this branch of the family. Ultimately, we decided we really wanted to travel to southern Sweden to meet her and her family and see where my dad's grandmother had lived before she left Sweden for the United States as a teenager in the 1890s. Now, this sort of thing would have been inconceivable just a decade or so ago because we really needed the power of DNA and genealogical research combined to connect with our cousins in Sweden and understand how they were related to us. That's because we would not have found these cousins through paper records alone because there was a break in the line and we wouldn't have known to look for them. So, by the way, in this picture, these are all pictures I took on our trip. We wound up going, my brother and I went with our dad and our aunt to Sweden in the fall of 2019. And in that picture, you can see me and my brother. So, this is my dad's grandmother's secret. When we went to Sweden with the help of an incredibly generous local historian, we were able to see the school that she attended, which is still physically there, the church where she worshiped, and the foundation of the farmhouse where she lived. This was absolutely astonishing. We felt so close to her. There were some old wooden desks still remaining from when Sigrid was in school, and kids back then, kind of like kids now, were in the practice of scratching their names into the wood. So we examined those old names, curious to see if we would find Sigrid's among them. We didn't, but in a nearby old farmhouse museum, we did find an old clothing chest that had been in Sigrid's family, a piece of furniture that her uncle owned, which she may very well have walked by and touched and used. The immediacy of reaching out and brushing fingers across this piece of furniture that was connected to her just blew me away. And then we sat down for fika, or coffee and cake with my dad's second cousin and her daughter, the genealogist in the family, and we shared stories about our lives. We also came to understand the context for Sigrid's decision to leave for the US, the poverty and the lack of choices that she was escaping at that time. Now, a second cousin isn't a terribly distant connection. And the fact that my dad and his sister were able to meet their second cousin made the 1890s feel like not so long ago after all. Because of the power of genealogy and DNA, the past was suddenly within our reach, and we had tangible connections to an era before radios, before television, before airplanes existed, and to a person who was very important to my dad and his sister, and whose existence shaped mine in many ways, even though I never met her. Sigrid helped raise and nurture my dad and his siblings. And it's because of her that we live in this small town on the Hudson River where we live, and where my children are now fifth generation residents. Okay, so enough about me. I want to take us forward to now, a time when, unfortunately, it's not easy to travel to your ancestors' homelands because there's a major pandemic, but when something very important in the history of genealogy is happening nonetheless. There's some evidence that the pandemic is growing interest in genealogical research. Now, some of that may simply be because so many of us are spending a lot of time at home these days. But experts who specialize in helping adopted people and others find their close relatives through DNA and genealogy report that the pandemic may also be adding to the urgency of finding family and encouraging people to leapfrog over the emotional challenges of such reunions because they feel that there's no time like the present to make this kind of connection. But there's more. Genealogy gives much needed context for our present circumstances, something we especially need right now. It gives us context and it gives us perspective. What do I mean by that? I've interviewed a number of genealogists who've told me that the perspective that family history research teaches them gives them the strength to persevere during really difficult times. By the way, the image you see here on the left was an announcement from British Columbia from 1918 during what was known as the Spanish flu epidemic. And it was restricting gatherings of 10 or more. The language eerily similar to the restrictions on large gatherings that we now have in New York State in this email I recently got from our governor, limiting us to gatherings of no more than 10 people. The parallels of history can be remarkable and can help us a lot. I spoke with a genealogist named Jennifer Mendelson, who told me that her paternal grandfather's story of loss during that similar pandemic a century ago especially resonates right now. He was the only one of 10 siblings to live past his 20s. In 1918, he lost his wife to the Spanish flu, and then he lost his only living brother 2 days later. Without genealogy, people from the past, I think, can feel very different from us. Looked at in aggregate, a tragedy like that pandemic from 100 years ago can melt into an abstraction. But when you have a connection to someone who went through such a tragedy, the circumstances are much more real and relatable. And if the people of the past are real to us, this means we're not so different from them, right? It means that we can learn from them. So here's how Jennifer put it to me. She said, it's easy to think that the people who lived through things like the flu epidemic or the Holocaust were somehow constitutionally different or better equipped. I think we mythologize them, but they weren't. They were just as scared and confused and heartbroken as we are now. In other words, genealogy can help us persevere by helping us to see that we have been here before and that we are just as resilient and resourceful as the people who came before us. We can get through this. I'll add that family history can be a means of connection and solace in difficult times like these. A history professor I follow on Twitter wrote recently about a student who enlisted her grandmother's help for a class project on genealogy and history. The daily phone calls helped both grandmother and granddaughter with their anxiety and separation during a pandemic. The shared excavation of the past offered comfort at a time when the future felt unknown and frightening. And here's how the professor described it. To cope with the uncertainty, they tell stories about the past, fill in gaps to make something whole. I think that's such a beautiful quote. So I want to introduce you to a man named Rosario, who will help me explore how sometimes genealogy takes us in unexpected directions. In my research, I was particularly interested in understanding how people incorporate new information, new family, and new understandings of the past into their own identities. I tell a number of stories in depth in The Lost Family, stories of reunions and reckonings, stories, if you will, of awakenings to the complex truths that shaped us, even if we never knew about them. So, one of them is the story of Rosario, who believed himself to be Sicilian on his mother's side well into adulthood because that's what his mother told him he was. This identity as an Italian American was very important to Rosario, so much that he'd actually legally changed his name to Rosario, which wasn't the name he was born with. He gave himself that Italian name. He converted to Catholicism as an adult. He learned to sing opera. He proposed to his Italian American girlfriend after flying her to Italy. But through DNA and genealogical research, he got the shock of his life. He found out that, in fact, he is not Italian. In fact, he has significant sub Saharan African ancestry, a fact that his mother had hidden from him in an attempt to protect him from the discrimination that she had experienced as a biracial child growing up in a white community in the middle of the 20th century. So, this is a picture of Rosario and his late grandfather, a Black man who he would never have known about if it were not for genealogy and DNA testing. Rosario juxtaposes these two images because he knows that the resemblance is stunning. I never cease to see it when I look at that picture, the other picture next to it. This is actually the only picture Rosario has of his grandfather, and it is in fact his grandfather's mugshot from when he served time for the crime of adultery with a white woman who was Rosario's grandmother. Rosario, meanwhile, has since legally changed his name again to acknowledge what he now knows to be the truth of his ancestral roots. And he now goes by Jerome. Knowing the truth allowed him to understand his mother's experience, to get to know his late grandparents, and to track down and connect with his mother's Black cousins. It also allowed him to rethink his own identity. Genealogy allowed him to know about what had been hidden from him, to wrestle with his grandparents' sacrifices and his mother's pain. In a sense, genealogy gave back to him and his mother a little of what was taken by the cruelties of the past. Another story that I tell in The Lost Family, in fact, it forms the central narrative of the book, is the fascinating tale of a genealogist named Alice, who discovers that she is not entirely Irish with a smattering of British and Scottish through Eastern Europe. This revelation sets Alice on a kind of existential quest, complete with twists and turns and red herrings, a kind of genetic detective tale that takes her 2.5 years to solve. And her unexpected genetic ancestry has a really surprising and unusual explanation, and one that turns out to be 100 years in the making. In the end, Alice is not only able to find her Jewish family, but to find herself in some sense, to come to a much fuller accounting and understanding of where she came from and how she came to be. Her wisdom and dry humor and sharp analytical mind have been touchstones for me over the last few years as I've been reporting and researching into how the past can touch our modern lives. This photograph I love. It goes back to the beginnings of Alice's genetic mystery. And it was taken in 1914. And that little baby on his father's lap would turn out to be key to Alice's understanding of who she is. Now, the people in this photograph could not possibly have known what we know now. The Spanish flu was a few years away when this photo was taken. Access to online genealogical information and DNA testing for family history research were more than 80 years in the future when this photo was taken. We are privileged to be able to solve mysteries and understand our past in all its beauties and complexities in a way that the people in this photograph could only dream of. And I think that it's important to listen to the stories of people like Alice and Rosario and in turn to the truths that they have to tell us about their ancestors. They illuminate the importance of the past to the present and the ways in which the past still shapes us now. If the people that I've spoken with are any guide, these revelations don't mean that people privilege the past over the present or that they suddenly come to value biology over experience or that they abandoned the identities they had before they did their historical digging in favor of new ones. Rather, what I've found is that understanding the past deepens people's personal narratives rather than replacing them. Over and over, what unites these stories is that people speak about the value of knowing the truth as they take stock of their own lives. Because when you're telling the story of your life, you need to know your own beginnings in order to be able to tell the rest of the story. This is the power of genealogy and DNA, that they can orient us in space and time, that they can empower us with the reality of how we came to be. And you see these commonalities in the language that people use. So, for example, an adopted woman I interviewed named Jackie described the desire to know more about her birth mother and her birth mother's decision to place Jackie for adoption as, quote, a hole in the gut. And meanwhile, a man named Jason, who spent decades searching for the identity of his genetic father, described this desire similarly as a yearning. And when at last he found his dad, who hadn't known about his existence and who welcomed Jason into his life, Jason and his wife reported that he actually gradually grew into a different person. With that yearning met, that hole filled, Jason became more confident, his wife told me. So you hear this language about longing, about filling in the missing pieces, about wanting to meet and form relationships with genetic kin. Sometimes when people are surprised about the reality of their genetic families, if they discover, for instance, that they're not genetically related to the man they call dad, these revelations can be deeply difficult and they don't always lead to happy reunions. But over and over, people told me that they were grateful to know the truth so that they could more fully understand themselves, put their lives and families into context, answer questions that they'd long had. And they wanted to talk about their experiences so that they could pass their hard won wisdom on to others. So, as one seeker, a therapist named Krista, put it to me, we just need the past to catch up to where we are now. In addition to this language about valuing the truth, you also hear language about the sense of rootedness. An adopted woman named Gay told me her experience of DNA testing in genealogy was that it was, quote, grounding. It's validating. She said, you've put your stake in the ground and it's in Belarus or it's in French Canada or it's in New Orleans. It's wow, my people came from here. And another woman told me of the first time she met her half siblings. She said, it's like magnets. I may not know where the other end of the magnet is, but I'm being pulled to it. How can we answer anything about ourselves if we don't know what our roots are, if we don't know who our people are? So I think that it's so important right now that we be listening to these stories, the stories of those who found themselves through their journeys into the past. They speak to questions around identity that I think are central to the human condition. And these stories have a lot to teach us about family and love and the beauty and the elasticity of the human heart. So if you're interested in hearing more of these kinds of stories about genealogy and personal discovery, please feel free to sign up for my newsletter at libbycopeland.com or on my Facebook author page. I only send it out about once a month. And I am so happy to be here today and to virtually meet all of you and thrilled to talk some more and take some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Esther, you can stop sharing on your end and we can chat some more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Libby. Wow, so interesting and some fantastic stories there, just so fascinating. So thank you so much for sharing those with us. And I see we've just received some amazing comments. People talk about the quest and the search as you describe, and just so nice to see what people are writing here. I see Kathy, she says, the pandemic provided me with more time to do my research, gain insight from topics like this online, and organizing family photos. This work will never be done in my lifetime, as there's always new information available, but I love the quest I am on. So that's so nice to hear. So many really great stories. Sherry says, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And just some really nice comments here. We won't get to all of them. If anyone has questions for Libby, please put them in the comment section. We'd love to ask her. We do have a question here from Ruth, and she asks, you've written that generally speaking, people are pleased to know the truth, even if it's surprising. Can you say more about what determines how people respond? There seems to be a distinction Oh, sorry. I think that's it. Can you say more about what determines how people respond?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know that I would say always pleased to know the truth, but glad to know the truth. And I use that word um, carefully and thoughtfully because sometimes the things they're finding out are, historically, personally, emotionally fraught. And their first reaction may not be to immediately embrace the news. It may take them a while. But they will, if it's something that they're learning about their own family or particularly about their own genetic origins, even when it is difficult, they will often, and for I think every single person I interviewed told me when it was about them, they were ultimately glad to know because it informed their understanding of themselves and really deepened things. Sometimes it could be awkward. Sometimes it was difficult within a family. So it wasn't always smooth sailing, but at the same time, it changed their sense of who they were in a really profound way and allowed them to really understand themselves. So I think some of why sometimes it can turn out a little bit better, or things that you can do, I would say, to encourage better outcomes, have to do with respecting different people's timelines. The people that I interviewed who tended to do best were the people who were testing and finding things out for themselves. They had agency. And sometimes the people on the other side can take a little bit more time. The people say if you're reaching out to genetic kin and they don't know about you, they might need some more time to kind of come around, and people's timelines can be different. And so that is a major, those two things, um, people having agency and people being allowed to come to information in their own time, seemed to, anecdotally, at least in the interviews I did, sort of strengthen the chances that people were going to be able to accept surprising news when it came and then form relationships with their newly found family.
I see a comment here from Phyllis, and she says, my cousins have had time during the pandemic to ask me for info on our family history. I've been working on it for 20 years and have learned so much with the help of my heritage. I'm now awaiting a response from a newly found cousin in Poland, thanks to DNA testing.
That is so cool. And, just to piggyback on what somebody was saying earlier, someone was talking about genealogical research being, the work of their life and that they would never be done. And part of what I was so interested in and continue to remain fascinated by is genealogists, right? The original family detectives, and how they have formed and transformed this field. Many of them have become citizen scientists, figuring out how to use the DNA, right? Figuring it out themselves years ago, using technology that they had at their fingertips, or creating it, or creating databases and spreadsheets. And part of what I was interested in was the history of genealogy, how it came to be, and this modern genealogical sense of, like, you're looking at your phone, or you're doing research on your phone late into the night until your phone dies, right? Because you're just so very, very tantalizingly close to finding the identity of your great great grandmother, the one thing you need. And then, of course, once you get it, well, then there's always another question at the other side, right? So I was interested in that, both how genealogists have themselves helped, shape the field that they're in, and genetic genealogists as well, and also this lovely obsessiveness, which I very, very much relate to. I talk about it as falling down a rabbit hole, because it really, I did some research one day where I completely lost track of time. And I know many genealogists have described this, where you lose 5 hours in the midst of thinking you're just going to get on for 15 minutes.
So true, so true. And I think that's part of genealogy humor. Genealogists always joke that, their job is never done. And yeah, they just don't have enough hours in the day, definitely. We have a question from Barbara, and she asks, um, there seems to be a big difference between stories that are told in families and given over from generation to generation. and DNA tests and what they reveal, and how do we kind of reconcile the two, and where do they kind of come together?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is the moment of that kind of genetic reckoning. And DNA alone isn't going to tell you, it's going to give you information, but you really need the genealogical research hands in hand with it in order to make sense of the DNA. But I do think, that there is often, what we think we know, and then what the DNA and the genealogical record bears out. And we're in this moment where a lot of people are, rethinking what they thought they knew, and sometimes going to their elders and saying, "Hey," as Rosario did, he talked to me about going to his mother and saying, "Listen, um, you know, the DNA test suggests this thing that I wasn't expecting. Can we talk about it?" And it was, a very painful thing, I think, for her, a decision she made out of necessity. But, the way that he describes their ability to discuss this, and then his understanding of his own history and the history of Vermont, where his mom came from, the history of America, really, I found that just so moving, right? Because we are now in this moment where we can kind of like look at the facts and we can reconcile ourselves to them. So yeah, I think it's extraordinary.
We have a nice comment here from Ellen, and she says, COVID-19 has provided me with more time to devote to online research. It has helped me to slow down and think about my brick walls. And that's something that, we all have to kind of take a step back sometimes and see it from the outside. And we're all so involved and so ensconced in that, but it can really help to gain a new perspective. And she said, I've been able to break through one of my walls that has been challenging me for 20 years. So there's a silver lining to this challenging year.
That's absolutely amazing. I mean, it's like that when you're writing a manuscript for a book too. Sometimes you need a little bit of time and then you come back to it just to kind of solve those problems. But yes.
Wow, and Carrie says it never ends. As now that I know who my biological parents were, I'm now trying to break through brick walls. I've researched on other relations. I also enjoy researching my adoptive family. So yeah, definitely, we see that being said here over and over. It's just such a theme here that there's so much to do. But hopefully, everyone here has had a little bit more time lately to concentrate on their family history and the importance of looking back and researching that part of our lives. So great to hear from you all. And Libby, we just so appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much. We'll now just announce the winner of our competition. One lucky winner who gets to choose between the MyHeritage Complete Plan or a MyHeritage DNA kit. And there are just so many comments here. So thank you all for entering. We really appreciate it. Some great stories here. Really nice to see them all. So thank you everyone for commenting. And the winner is Elvis Piovani, and Elvis wrote us, yes, COVID has changed my research, not only because of the time I could spend on it, but also it made me think of the past pandemics in a different way. I live in northern Italy, and some of my ancestors died because of pandemics. For example, the 1630 Black Plague killed about 75% of the inhabitants here in less than half a year. Incredible to imagine. And one of them was my ancestor. He luckily had one son who survived, and that's where I come from. So amazing story, Elvis. And yeah, and it's exactly as you said, Libby, kind of putting our lives in perspective of the historical context and seeing the similarities in the struggles and things that our ancestors went through. And really what an incredible takeaway from this year. So thank you for sharing that with us, Elvis, and we'll be in touch with you privately to claim your prize. So once again, thank you so much, Libby, for sharing with us. And we found this so fascinating. Anyone that wants to rewatch it, it is available now on our Facebook channel under the video section, as well as all of our past Facebook Lives. And we hope to see you all at our next one. So thank you everyone for joining us. And we hope that no matter what the weather is, as we saw, it's very different all over the world. We hope that you all have a great day. So thank you to everyone. Thanks, Libby.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you to everyone from all over. So cool to see you.
Bye, everybody.